sky this week does not hand you just one thing, it gives you layers. A crescent moon climbing night by night, Venus burning low in the west, a dawn lineup of Mercury, Saturn, and Mars so tight it can fit inside a single binocular field, a fading comet trying to outrun the sunrise, an annual return of the Lyrids, a beautiful Venus-Uranus pairing for anyone with optics, and by the weekend, the moon closing in on Regulus for a genuine occultation from parts of the United States. And if you like a little astrology with your astronomy, this week has a noticeable shift in tone as well. The sun enters Taurus on Sunday night, and Venus enters Gemini just after midnight, late Thursday night into Friday, and Uranus follows into Gemini on Saturday night. So, the week begins grounded, grows livelier, and ends with a little voltage in the air. Good evening, my fellow night-side travelers. This is Sunny from Nite Muse Media, coming to you from somewhere above the 45th parallel where the stars are still willing to talk to anyone patient enough to listen. From April 19th through April 25th, the moon is rebuilding. On Sunday evening, it's just over 2.5 days old, about 10% illuminated, and standing above Venus and the Pleiades in Taurus. By Monday evening, it hangs roughly halfway between Venus and Jupiter, the three biggest objects in the early evening sky. By Wednesday evening, it passes about 4 degrees north of Jupiter in Gemini, and then Thursday night brings first quarter at 10:32 p.m. Eastern, and by Saturday, the moon is moving into Leo and setting up a close encounter with Regulus. So this week is not about one headline, it's about changing geometry, where the moon is, how far apart the planets are, what can be framed in binoculars, and what can only be caught low in twilight or just before dawn. What becomes visible only if you're willing to be outside when most people are asleep. Astrologically, the moon does change this week. Sunday night at 9:39 p.m. Eastern, the sun enters Taurus. That tends to shift the feel of things away from raw momentum and towards steadier ground, patience, practical choices, comfort and stability, real-world traction stuff. And then, just after midnight on Friday, Venus enters Gemini, lightening the social tone and making the air feel a little quicker, a little more curious, and definitely more verbal. On Saturday night at 8:51 p.m. Eastern, Uranus enters Gemini, which is one of those larger signature shifts that can feel like static building in the background before the storm ever arrives. I don't know if you've ever felt that sensation, just maybe laying in bed late at night, and all of a sudden you can feel the hairs stand on edge and prickling on the top of your skin just before the lightning storm begins to hit. So the spiritual subtext of the week feels something like this. Start by planting your feet, then let the signals change. So now let's get specific about the planet watch. Mercury, Saturn, and Mars are all buried in the dawn glare this week. Extremely low in the east, your best chances comes Monday morning, April 20th. About 30 minutes before sunrise, all three planets crowd into an area only about 2 degrees wide and stand only about 2 degrees above the eastern horizon. Mercury is the brightest at about magnitude minus 0.2, minus 0.3. Saturn is next at about plus 0.9, and Mars is faintest at about plus 1.2. Now Saturn sits just 28 arc minutes above Mercury, and Mars lies just over a degree beyond them. In theory, it is a beautiful little chain. In practice, it is a brutal horizon challenge. You will want binoculars or a small scope, a completely open eastern horizon, and common sense about putting your optics away well before the sun clears the horizon. And by the way, happy birthday to my beautiful daughter on April 20th. Enjoy that magnificent gift of a sunrise. Venus is the easy one. It's still blazing at about magnitude minus 3.9. It's low in the west-northwest in the evening twilight. An hour after sunset, it remains about a fist above the horizon. And this week it passes the Pleiades at a distance of about 3 degrees. That is one of those pairings that works beautifully with the naked eye. It looks richer in the binoculars and feels almost designed for sky watchers who like their astronomy a little bit romantic. Uranus is the challenge tucked behind Venus. On Thursday the 23rd, Uranus sits less than a degree south of Venus, around 45 arc minutes to 3/4 of a degree, depending on how you frame it. Uranus is around magnitude 5.8 and only about 3 arc seconds wide, so it will not leap out at you, but because Venus is so bright, the planet becomes a signpost. Through a telescope, Venus looks about 11 arc seconds wide and 90% lit, while Uranus appears as a tiny, flat-looking disk rather than a true pinpoint. Jupiter remains the strong evening anchor, shining at about magnitude minus 2.0 high in the west at nightfall, roughly 50 degrees to the upper left of Venus. In a telescope, it is down to about 37 arc seconds wide and still shrinking as Earth pulls farther ahead in its orbit. It is also creeping closer to the Delta Geminorum. What's that? Closest approach still ahead on April 30th. That makes Jupiter a good target this week, not just because it's bright, but because it is actually moving through a specific piece of the sky with something to compare it against. Now, old Comet C 2025 R3 PanSTARRS is still technically in play, but this is a specialist target now. On Tuesday morning, it stands only about 2 degrees above the eastern horizon, an hour before sunrise, a little brighter than 5th magnitude and low in Pisces. The nearest bright marker is Elgenib in Pegasus. From there, the source note says to scan about 9.4 degrees due east to land on the comet. Its tail spans several degrees, and that nucleus reportedly shows that familiar green glow from the diatomic carbon. But honesty matters here. This is not a casual naked eye event for most people. This is for patient observers, binocular users, and people who do not mind losing sleep for a difficult target that may disappear into dawn before fully revealing itself. The Lyrids are the week's real pre-dawn headline. They peak on the morning of Wednesday, April 22nd. The radiant rises late and then stands more than 60 degrees high in the east by about 3 a.m., just to the right of bright Vega in Lyra. The best viewing window comes after the moon sets, shortly before 1:30 a.m. local daylight time, when the sky is darkest and the radiant is climbing into a much better position. Under ideal conditions, the theoretical zenith hour rate is about 20 meteors per hour, which means that real observers under decent skies should still catch a respectable handful per hour as dawn approacheth. The meteors are medium fast, moving around 30 miles per second, and they come from dust shed from the comet Thatcher, whose orbital period runs a little over 400 years. And that, to me, is part of the beauty of the Lyrids. You are not just watching streaks, you are watching ancient debris from a comet that most human beings will never see in person. Now, here's our night by night, Sunday, April 19th. Sunday evening opens the week with one of its prettiest unaided eye scenes. The crescent moon is more than 2.5 days old and about 10% lit. It stands above Venus in the western sky with the Pleiades between or nearby as twilight deepens. One source places the moon about 11 degrees above Venus by evening, while another notes that it is about 5 degrees east of the Pleiades and that Uranus lies roughly about 4.5 degrees south of the cluster. It's going to be in there somewhere. So this is not just Moon and Venus. It is an entire Western composition. Moon, Venus, Pleiades, and a faint ice giant hidden in the same neighborhood for anyone with the optics. And on the astrological side, this is the night the sun enters Taurus. So the week begins with a very literal and symbolic shift towards steadier ground. Monday the 20th. Monday morning is the dawn challenge. challenge. You have the Mercury, Saturn, and Mars crowd together just above the eastern horizon, all inside a region of about 2 degrees wide, only about 2 degrees high, and 30 minutes before sunrise. So Mercury's the one to find first. Saturn is just above it, and then Mars is fainter and higher still. If you watch all three, you earned it. And then by evening, the moon has moved and now hangs roughly halfway between Venus and Jupiter, making these the three brightest objects in the early evening sky. If you wanted one easy general audience night this week for simply walking outside and orienting yourself, Monday evening is a very strong contender. Tuesday, April 21st, Tuesday morning is probably your last decent shout at Comet PanSTARRS before it really starts to sink out of usefulness for the northern observers. Again, it is low, just above the eastern horizon, and binoculars are probably your best realistic choice. Tuesday evening is where the week starts building geometry. The moon is forming changing shapes with Jupiter, Pollux, and Castor. One source describes these as evolving quadrilaterals, the kind of pattern no one talks about enough in sky reports because they are genuinely fun to watch from night to night. The moon is easy to pick up in late afternoon if the sky is clear. Jupiter comes out in mid-twilight. Pollux and Castor, well, they follow, and then Gemini fills in behind them. Wednesday, April 22nd. This is the Lyrid morning. If you are going out, the prime window is after moonset and before dawn, when Vega is up and the radiant is high. The sky is finally dark enough to help you. Do not stare directly at the radiant. Let your vision widen. The best meteors often appear some distance away from where the shower technically begins. And then Wednesday evening gives you one of the week's easiest planetary pairings. The moon passes 4 degrees north of Jupiter into Gemini. Another source frames them as only about 3 to 4 degrees apart, with Pollux and Castor looming above like watchful points. It's a good night to mention scale, too. Jupiter looks closer to the moon, but it's about 2,200 times farther away and about 40 times larger in actual diameter. Looking at Jupiter's Galilean satellites and binoculars or a small telescope is one of the easiest ways to turn that abstract scale into something a listener can feel. Thursday, the 23rd is going to be dense. First, the moon reaches the first quarter at 10:32 p.m. Eastern. In twilight, its bright curved limb points toward Jupiter, Pollux, and Castor. Second, Venus is at its closest pass by the Pleiades, about 3 degrees away. The western sky is offering a beautiful bright planet and star cluster scene even before you bring optics into the conversation. Third, optics are going to matter tonight. Uranus sits just below Venus, less than a degree away, and this is one of the best beginner-friendly opportunities of the week to deliberately find a planet most people have never knowingly seen. And astrologically, Thursday night is one of the week's more electric thresholds. Venus perfects its conjunction with Uranus in Taurus late in the evening and then slips into Gemini just after midnight. So this is a night of closeness, change, beauty, and instability all at once. Friday the 24th is less about one headline event and more about careful observing. In the very early hours, Venus passes 0.8 degrees due north of Uranus, so the two are still close after sunset, even if you missed them the night before. By evening, the waxing moon is in eastern Cancer, not far from the Beehive cluster M44. The Beehive is a lovely binocular object, even with the moon nearby, shining around third magnitude and spanning roughly a degree of sky. And if you have a telescope, Friday night is also a fine lunar observing night, the Sea of Serenity. It sits dark and distinct in the moon's northern hemisphere, and along its northeastern rim, you can go hunting for Poseidonius, a crater about 60 miles wide with a smaller superimposed crater and subtle differences in albedo across the floor. This is the kind of night when the moon stops being a symbol and starts being terrain. Astrologically, Venus is now in Gemini, so the emotional weather of the week has shifted a little too. Lighter, quicker, more curious, more talkative. And Saturday the 25th closes the week With one of the most specific astronomical events in the celestial script, the moon moves into Leo and passes in front of Regulus for parts of the eastern contiguous United States and other regions. InTheSky.org lists the occultation on Saturday, April 25th, and notes that, in places like the U.S., this disappearance and reappearance can happen in daylight or twilight, depending on the location, which means observers need to use real caution if attempting it while the sun is still up. Even where the full occultation is not visible, the Moon-Regulus pairing itself is still worth attention. So this is a strong day for binoculars, a stronger day for a telescope, and a very good day to remind people that the moon is not just passing pretty stars from our point of view, it is constantly proving how dynamic the sky actually is. And once again, astrologically, Saturday night adds one more layer. Uranus enters Gemini at 8:51 p.m. Eastern. However one chooses to interpret that, it certainly fits the feeling of the week ending with a change in signal. And before we leave the week entirely to planets, meteors, moonlight, and old comet dust, a quick look at the things that we humans put up there ourselves. The clearest man-made sky event this week is Blue Origin's third New Glenn mission, slated for no earlier than Sunday, April 19th, from Launch Complex 36 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, with a launch window from 6:45 to 8:45 a.m. Eastern. The mission is carrying AST Space Mobile's Bluebird 7 satellite to low Earth orbit. So even a week dominated by the natural sky, the human sky remains busy too. Rockets, ranges, payloads, and the quiet infrastructure of the orbital age. So this entire week, it should remind us that wonder is not vague. Wonder has position. Wonder has timing, direction to face, horizons to clear, a moment to catch before it's gone. And I'm reminded of a line by Sarah Williams. I have loved the stars too truly to be fearful of the night. Until next time, keep watching the skies, follow those signals, and question that noise. I'll see you on the night side.